Good morning. I didn't say trailblazer, so that was very nice, Alfred. That was not in my bio, I promise. And unexpectedly, Alfred and I were talking, and he brought that up to me, and I wasn't even thinking about that, but that really is one of the purposes of a panel like this, is that often, if you've experienced foster care, even working within the child welfare system, you can feel invisible, voiceless, marginalized, and so here we are doing this panel, and our national CASA rep comes up to me, and we start having this conversation, and he discloses that to me, and I said to him, would you be willing to share that, to the group? And he said yes, and so I appreciate you putting yourself out there like that, and it was wonderful meeting you. So when we got into the room, we had expectations that we would all have mic lapels, and we would be in a circle a little bit above, a stage or something, so you all could see us. And so we had to transform this room, so that was the first thing we did. And then I said, get rid of the podium, and then I realized I have a few notes and I need the podium, but I'm not gonna use the podium. So I'm gonna do just a very brief intro of why I wanted to do this panel. Jerry and I were on a panel similar about 5 or 6 years ago, and it was challenging to find people who were willing to be on the panel, people with lived experience within the national network. And I am not sure if it's coincidental, but now 6 years later, when I put the ask out, there were more people than we could actually accommodate on the panel that were willing to be here. So that, to me, is an exciting to see. But there's other purposes for why I wanted to bring you all in the room today and come together. So my name is Charles Leonard. The only thing that I would add to my bio is that, yes, I was in foster care. I was born into the system. My mother was 14 when she had me. My family's largely from rural Appalachia, very much living in poverty, so really no one was in a position to step up. So I was in foster care for 5 years. And I experienced some of the worst that the foster care system has to offer, which is probably not the right way of putting that, but the worst of the foster care system. I was ultimately adopted, and then many years later, I ended up becoming the adoptive father to my nephew, so through kinship care. So 47 years involved in the system, one way or another. And so really, if you notice the title, the very long title of the workshop, that I probably would do differently if I could do it again, is I think there's an assumption with this panel that our child welfare system is inherently harmful, it's inherently unjust, it's a system that has been that way forever, and that really the reason why we're having this discussion today is how do we, 100,000 volunteers across the country, a national network, how do we push for bold transformational change? As a matter of fact, some would say not even change. We need to abolish the system as it is and replace it with a different system. I am in that camp, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. The other reason for the purpose of this panel is I'm just going to be quite honest. I'm 47 years old, and what I have found is that within the child welfare community, that there's ageism as there is in the society as a whole. For whatever reason, after you're about 25, 28 years old, nobody wants to hear anymore what you have to say, right? So when you listen to panels, it's often folks who are experienced in the system, which is very important. They have very important perspective. They're pretty loud over there, aren't they? Maybe I'm loud too, they're saying the same thing. So they have very important perspective, but why aren't we learning from the wisdom of folks in their 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s that experienced foster care in the 50s? I experienced it in the 70s and 80s. We stopped listening to people, and there is a lot of wisdom at this table, let me tell you. These are child welfare leaders with a lot of wisdom, and the reality is if we are actually going to create a system that works, that supports children and families, that cares for the children that the system is designed to protect and care for, we need to be at the decision-making tables. People with lived experience need to be making those decisions. And so this is the purpose for the intergenerational panel that we have today. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what we mean about a system that is unjust. But I'm curious, how many of you believe that the system that you are working within, volunteering within, is harmful and unjust? How many of you believe that? Yes, you said many times. Was it?
At times.
At times, okay. So, but here's the interesting thing is that I've been involved in my whole career. Many of you, how many of you volunteered for at least 10 or 15 years with CASA? Wow, look at that. So, aren't we part of that system? So the question is, if we are part of the system, we need to be doing something about it, and how might we be being complicit in the very system that we're trying to change, right? So we're going to be having some of those discussions. So instead of introducing all the panelists, my hope was that we were going to sit in a circle. So I'm going to sit at the end of the table, which is a little awkward, and try to facilitate the conversation. But the first question that we're going to talk about, and at 11 o'clock, we are going to stop for Q&A, okay? Because there's nothing worse than sitting in a panel and then the panelists speak, and then 7 minutes before the panel is done is when they start to do Q&A. So we're going to do Q&A, and when we do that, there's just a couple quick caveats that I want to kind of put out there. But the first question for the panel is a very simple question. In addition to introducing yourselves, why did you say yes to actually do this? And there's a couple folks that have just flown in just for the panel that are leaving tonight, leaving to tomorrow. Why did you agree to the emotional labor of doing this? Why did you agree to to coming here to St. Louis to be part of this panel? So everyone's going to introduce themselves and answer that question, and then we have just a handful of other questions that we'll open up to the group. Okay? All right. Monty, can we start with you?
There's 2 chairs up there. If somebody wants to come out.
Good morning. My name is Madi Garcia, and I'm with Cobb County Juvenile Court CASA in Georgia. And the why I am here is to offer input from a different perspective based on my personal and professional experience of also being in the system, going through the process of relative placement, going reunification, and then ultimately running away from home at 15 and never going back. And those experiences.
Monty, I forgot to ask also, what are you hoping that the audience will get?
Just a different understanding and perspective, and hopefully, are they louder than me or am I loud? Just a different understanding and perspective, and maybe just getting some nuggets to take back when you're advocating for the children that we serve.
So my name is Jerry Willis Mendiola, and I am the Executive Director of CASA, the 10th Judicial District in Arkansas. I said yes to this panel because the last time Charles and I did this panel, I do feel that we've seen a little change with national. I do think that the change for our local programs is going to come. National needs to change big time. During our directors meeting, we talked about that. We need to have best practice, but we do have to change our way of thinking as well. I know locally with our program, we've changed our thinking. We are working towards the families. We are being non-biased, and I'm hoping that you all open your mind, are non-biased, meet the parents where they're at, if that parent's working their case, work with them. At the end of this, I really hope you guys open your mind, if it's not already. I know we do have some great volunteers, great staff members who do work towards that, but I really do want to influence the ones who maybe don't. And I was in hopes that someone from National would come in and listen to us, and so I'm very grateful for Alfred. And I hope that some of what we say does go back to National, and then we can see some of those changes on a national level.
Roger, before you do the intro, there's a few people in the back. Are there other seats that folks have next to them? Can you raise your hand? We can, if you want to sit in the back, I will literally pick up chairs and move them back to you so you don't have to stand the whole time. You sure? I can bring chairs back to you. Okay, all right. Roger.
Hi, my name is Roger Salant, and it's pretty obvious that I'm the most senior member here. I was excited to come because I think that people who assisted me, I lived in foster care for 18 years and 17 years and 4 months. And in that time, I probably experienced social workers, somewhere between 12 and 15 social workers. The one thing that hasn't changed is the state of mind of the child. But I think the state of care for the children, the idea of CASA, which I think is roughly, sometimes it's in the 70s, it's moving. It's certainly a lot less, that system is a lot less harsh than when I was involved. But the states of mind, the feeling of abandonment, anger, the actual need for connection, the need for permanent advocacy with a social worker, with a CASA volunteer is very important. The other thing is that the need to have a sincere connection with the child. Too often we use hackneyed phrases like, I know how you feel. Oh, BS, you don't know how I feel. That attempt really dulls your ability to be connected. You have to be invitational, and you have to really be connected in an empathetic way in order to be effective.
Thank you, Roger. Hi, everyone. I am Charity Chandler Cole. I'm the CEO of CASA of Los Angeles. I'm also a commissioner for children and families within our county and leading the work in LA around mandated reporting. In addition to having lived experience in the foster care and juvenile justice systems, I was a foster parent by way of relative caregiver to my nephew for 12 years. So why I said yes to being on this panel, when one of my sisters or brothers asked me to show up for something, I say yes. It's non-negotiable. I will be there. I will show up. But also, we're the experts at our stories. We're the experts when it comes to what we've experienced, what changes need to occur, what we like, what we don't like, and oftentimes our voices are muted in these experiences, in advocacy. So I showed up to give you all some expertise on some of the experiences we have in the system, and I really hope you walk away with just feeling invigorated to challenge the system, to question equity, to have some curiosity around why we do business the way we do business, but also to look inward and say, what is the role I'm playing? Or am I being complicit in the system? And, how do I show up? And I'm really hoping you ask the right questions during the Q&A, that you allow yourself to be vulnerable, to be transparent, because we definitely will be, and I'm just excited to be on this journey with the rest of my
Hi, good morning. My name is Adam Starks, and I aged out of the system back in 1998. During that time, the success rate for foster youth aging out of the system hovered around 3%. Right, 25 years later or so, it's still the same. Right, and a lot of people going through the system don't really think about that. They go through, do their job, make the changes as they can, to see children day in and day out. And you have to wonder, why is that success rate so low? And I think it's really because, most states drop off support at 18. Think about when you were 18 years old and you have all the answers to life. I know I sure didn't. And thank goodness, when I ended up homeless, shortly after my 18th birthday, another foster family picked me up. And that's the reason that I'm here today. That being said, what are the other questions?
What do you hope?
What do I hope they get
What do you
out
hope
of
they
this?
get?
Well, I really hope that you're open-minded to radical change. I mean, that's really what we need. When you look at a child and you look at the system, and I'll touch on this in another question, but you look at our society today and where children are at. We have 400,000 foster youth on any given day. You do the math at a 3% success rate, that's not very good for our society or our future. So I hope you're open-minded to the changes that are necessary and realize that you don't have to do it alone. One of the things that I'm working on as a CEO of Mender, it's a social determinants of health app. One of the things I'm working on is getting everyone to communicate with each other, because right now operate in silos, and that contributes to burnout. And one of the last things kids need is their social workers burned out or their CASA volunteers burned out, because they need that consistency more than anything. And you all offer that day in and day out, but I'm sure some of you are tired of it, and some of you are wondering where the other help is going to come from. There's a lot of people out there doing good work, but right now we're operating in silos, and we can change that, but we have to ask for that change, and we have to create that change.
Thanks, Rod. Jerry. Jerry. Actually, you just brought up a question that I wasn't prepared to ask, but how many of you are currently volunteers working with children? How many of you are CASA staff? Okay. If you're willing to share, how many of you are approaching or at burnout or pretty tired? Okay. Okay, fair enough. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that's a really important point, is that is part of the purpose of this conference, and it's part of really what I'm hoping that we can offer, and that our staff can offer, and that our leadership teams can offer is support, because this is really challenging work. One of the things we talked about the other night, though, is when people used to say to me when they were on cases, and I know it might feel dismissive, but they would say, how do you do it? Like, how do you not get burnt out? How do you not give up? And I would just say very simply, how can I give up? Like, I'm in the position of privilege and power. These children and families, look at the position that they're in. I can't give up. Like, if they're not giving up, how can I give up, But that's a simple response. We have an obligation to support one another to not reach that point. One of the things that came up during our conversation that we decided to add as a question, and it came up at the state directors meeting yesterday. I think there are a few other state directors in here, but just for full transparency, how we market our public relations and how we market what we do actually doesn't sit especially well with some people with lived experience, right? And so this question came up, and I just want to spend a few minutes on it. And maybe some people have thought about this, maybe some people haven't. So some of our slogans at National: change a child's story, I for the child, everyday heroes, give a child hope. How do you all feel about those slogans? What comes up for you, whether it's positive or it gives you pause? Because it was interesting to have the conversation. I wasn't prepared to actually dive into this, but it seemed significant to some of us on the panel. Monty, I think you actually kind of were a catalyst for that conversation. What do you think about those?
Now that you told Monty, yes, I will. I think, because I think those slogans are things that we see, and all of us as individuals take that and run with it, just depending on who we are and what we've been through and our perspective. When you hear be the everyday hero or give a child hope, some people look at those slogans and think, oh, I need to go in, I need to be a CASA warrior and remove this child from their family because they have a horrible family, they deserve better, and they do everything in their power to possibly advocate for this child to be terminated and severed from their family in order to be adopted or something else, right? Or lingering care. The goal is sometimes, when I've seen it, and I don't know if anybody else has experienced this, where you see somebody fighting so hard because they truly believe they deserve a better life, but that is with a different family, and that's not always the case. Some people read those slogans and think, oh, I want to go and advocate for this child while they're in care in their best interest, whether it be their academics, their medical, their, whatever it is, so that they don't fall through the cracks while they're in the system, which ultimately happens quite often. I think we all know that. And so it's just a difference. When you're advocating for a child and what you think is in their best interest because you believe that they deserve better, which means a better family, that's not always the case. When you go in there and you're advocating for a child to make sure that they're okay, that all of their needs are being met, they're not slipping through the cracks, and that you're ensuring and being there for them, being supportive, pouring into them is probably one of the biggest things, encouraging them. These kids don't have anybody to say, oh my gosh, you made it a B, or you made a C from an F to a C. That's awesome, you deserve some type of recognition. A lot of them don't get that. they don't have anybody to recognize their achievements or to give them a high five or be proud of them or just pour into them like, you know, some kids get in this lifetime. And so as a CASAs can do that. And again, they're so hyper-focused sometimes on they need a better life, they need a TPR, I need to write my report, I can make these recommendations, and sometimes forget the small things that can go so far.
To me, it sounds like they need a cheerleader, a supporter, and not a superhero to take them out of the situation, you know? They don't need to be saved, they need to be supported.
So it gives you pause when we refer to our CASAs as heroes.
Yeah, they're not superheroes because we're supporting them, we're pouring into them. We want to be a support system.
Just food for thought for National CASA and for our network. You know, it's. I think people get a little ruffled when you start challenging these slogans, right? And that was one of the things we talked about last night that I would like to just mention to y'all is before we get to the Q&A, when we get to the Q&A, if there's something that either really resonates with you or that you're struggling with, that's a perfect thing to bring up during the Q&A so that we can work through this. I am not a marketing expert. I don't have the right slogans, but I think it's important to hear the impact that these slogans might be having on the children we serve, people that live the experience, families that we're working with, etc. Were you gonna? I felt like you were gonna chime in, or no? No? Okay. Adam, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, I do want to chime in on that. The issue with the word heroes, you know, over the years, especially pre-COVID, during COVID and leading up to now, is it's been co-opted for people that we don't pay enough. So think about nurses, think about teachers. You know, if we just call them heroes, maybe that'll be good enough. And you know, we know that's not the case, right? They're leaving the profession in droves because they are underpaid, they're overworked, and you just have to be careful with that word now because it does have different connotations. If you're on social media, you see the negative aspects of that word as well. So it's not, you know, someone in a tight suit or with a cape, you know, going in and saving this child. It's just a regular person like you and I who have a chance to connect with that child. And you know, I love some of the other slogans, you know, I am for the child and things like that. It may sound obvious, but not everyone knows who CASA is. I'm from a small state, West Virginia, and I'm still, you know, 2 years later preaching to people about what CASA does and what it is and how they can be a part of it. So I think those slogans are more readily understood than heroes because that can go anywhere.
So our panel, again, as I said earlier, makes the assumption that we are all part of a system that is very harmful, right? And so the next question I was curious to hear from you all about was if we are all going to be change agents and get out there and share. I think you might have mentioned, I don't know exactly how you said it, maybe it was you that said, like, you want our CASAs to be out there, like, creating change, right? Rattling the system, disrupting the system, etc. Like, if we all are saying that the system is harmful and unjust, then we need to disrupt it, all of us, in our own ways, small and big. So let's start with the first part of the next question, which is, for folks who want some language or who want to be able to articulate probably what they already know, but maybe they don't have a language for, what is unjust about our system that we're all part of?
So I have to break that down. And I tend to go deep because I am a scholar activist. And so when we talk about an unjust system, we have to first look at the disproportionality in the system. We see overwhelmingly Black people, brown people, Native American people, poor people in the system. And then when we look at the intent behind why the child welfare system exists is to protect these poor Black and brown children. But what exactly are we protecting them from? When we have data that shows over 88% of children that are in the system are there because of poverty, or neglect that stems from poverty, and only 12% that are actually in the system because of abuse, we have to ask ourselves, what are we protecting them from? There has been a social and psychological war on Black people, brown people, and poor people. Through the media, through film and television, through political posturing and rhetoric, we have been conditioned to believe that Black people, brown people, and poor people are incapable of fully taking care of their children, of loving their children, of supporting their children. And to respond to this, we pass extremely harmful policies that surveil, that police, that separate families, and that destroy families. And we have to ask ourselves why, and how is this just? After World War I and World War II, when children were being adopted or being put into orphanages and foster cares, it was because they were helping widowed white women and their poor children who needed to be loved and needed to be safe. But then when Lyndon B. Johnson passed laws that stemmed from civil rights, when we were marching and fighting for our rights, for education, for jobs, for equity, for equality, what we got were laws that were passed that actually did more harm than good. As soon as funding, and mind you, we Black people, let's just focus on Black Native American people, immigrant people. We were not even allowed into foster care systems. And if we were, it was the most dilapidated, destructive systems that existed. And it wasn't until government was able to tie any type of support for us to funding, that's when we were allowed into these foster care systems. But then with the restrictions that widowed white women did not get. And so it went from a system of helping widowed white women to helping Black welfare queens, to helping Black mothers who were crack addicts. When we look at the white population who were also struggling from opioids, and we see it today, it's a public health issue, it's a public health crisis. But for us, we had a war on crime against Black people, a war on poverty against Black people and brown people and poor people, not in support of them. So when we talk about an unjust world, a system that we're supposed to show compassion for, how do you show compassion for a population of people that you have been conditioned to believe are not worthy of it? How do you do that? You can't do it. It's impossible to do it. So our system was never created for us. I am an abolitionist, and I do not believe we can operate in a space and reform a space that was never meant to help us, to restore us, and to heal us. And so our system is unjust because it wasn't created for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Now I know y'all looking at me like, who's gonna follow that? There's a reason why Charity's the lead on that question. And I'll just say that the conflation of poverty and neglect is something that everybody on this stage is very passionate about, that we need to make movement on and not just talk about. And the other issue that you just are making me think about is the injustices that lead children and families to be involved in the system, but then the injustices and the harm that people experience, children and families experience once they're in the system. And one of the things I just want to put out there that for y'all to think about, and why I believe in CASA so much, having been involved in the system for a really long time, my whole life, is that if you look at your DCF, CPS reports, some of them might have how many children are abused and neglected while in the system, right? Do you ever look at those stats? Anybody remember what your state says in terms of the number of children that are abused and neglected while in the foster care system? Massachusetts says 1%, right?
It's wrong.
No.
They lie.
Right. You see where I'm going with this, right?
Yeah, they don't
If you interview every research article that has come out that has interviewed alumni of the system in their 20s and 30s and 40s, estimate 20 to 50% of children who are in the foster care system will be abused, neglected while in the system.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about harm and a lack of justice, right? You want, and thinking about going back to the poverty piece, the child protection system is our country's #1 response to poverty. That's the system that's supposed to be addressing poverty. No wonder we're failing. Because the reality is, as Charity said, that if we were to actually address poverty in this country in a meaningful way, we wouldn't have 400,000 children in foster care. We'd have 30 or 40,000, 50,000 children across the country in foster care. We wouldn't need so many CASAs. We wouldn't need so many social workers, right? So I put that out there because I know it seems insurmountable, but the one thing that we can do is never let people forget these realities. And we're gonna actually talk about tangible things, but before we actually get to more of the tangible things that CASAs can do, staff can do, I wonder if anybody else has any thoughts about where you see the injustice and the harm in the system? Or did our passionate,
I don't know if you want to talk after Charity. Oh my gosh. Go ahead.
all right, Charity, you have done your job well, too well, actually. Well, the second part of the question was actually to challenge all of us, and whether it's Charity or other folks on the panel, where do you see us being complicit? In small ways, big ways, very concrete ways, where has CASA historically been complicit in perpetuating all of what we just talked about?
Does anyone want to take this one?
Charity's got it.
I would say by leaning into that lie. You know,
Yeah,
that's where
yeah.
the social and psychological work comes in. We believe these things, so as a result, we feel that we can come in and save these poor children. That's CASA was birthed out of white saviorism, if we're being honest. You know, these poor black and brown children who deserve better homes, deserve better parents, deserve better communities. Let us come in and save them. And we lack true education to the communities we're looking to serve. We lack true proximity and are afraid to actually get proximate to the very communities we want to serve. And so we're complicit in believing the lie and refusing to educate ourselves by denying that racism exists in the child welfare system. And by thinking that we and we alone can save these children. CASA is not the answer to saving children in America alone, but together we are. I just wrote a book called Stranger Danger, and it talks about how the system is complicit in harming children, and that having a title of social worker, lawyer, judge, CASA advocate means nothing. You are a stranger to these children until you show up and see them and hear them and understand the communities they come from and are willing to help not only them but their families. How do you serve the best interest of the child if you're unwilling to look at the mom, look at the dad, look at the context behind, look at the story that brought them to this moment in time. We refuse to address the issues that bring children into the system, and as a result, we're complicit.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
we even collude with white supremacy by believing and thinking that we alone are the answers.
That's right. That's it. Yeah.
So, from the moment, and we have several staff members, and we're gonna get to the compassion piece too, because not only is our system unjust, but somehow very compassionate people they lack compassion, right? So, but before we do that, I'm just wondering from the panel, from the moment that volunteers walk through the door, from the moment we screen volunteers, we let them know about the role, to training, to the moment when they first walk through the door and meet that child for the first time, or the family for the first time, what should they be thinking about? What should they be doing differently? If we were to really think about, if we were to do our work through this perspective, Cherry, that you're mentioning, I feel like in some ways it would totally change the script for how we do what we do. And I'm all about it, but at the same time, I want to make sure that folks are kind of aware of what that would look like. Monty, do you have?
I'll just say again, it goes back to, well, first of all, you can't advocate for a child that you don't lay eyes on. So when you're not seeing a child, how can you even make a recommendation in a CASA report on a child that you can't see, that you haven't seen? So you have to see the child wherever they are, wherever that is. And if you drive an hour away, then that's where you're going to see them, because that's what they sign up for. But when you see the child, just establishing a connection. Again, not being, as much as I hate to say, don't be fake. Don't try to say, I know what you're feeling. I know, I get, or say these. Just be there, be present, be consistent. Check on them. Again, just ensuring that they're fine. And that's where it will start. You have to start there with an open mind. And I will say sometimes it's harder to have that approach with older children, teenagers who have an opinion, who can verbalize how they feel, who sometimes don't speak and just sit there with their head down or seem disengaged, but the reality is they're not. They're just looking at you like they're 25 case managers they had in the past 3 years, or the different homes that they've been placed in, or schools that they've had to go to and change and over and all these things. They are looking at you just like somebody's going to be temporary in their life again, so they don't want to talk to you, they don't want to establish a friendship, they don't want you to be in their business, they don't want to have to repeat their story. But if you're present and you're there and you gain their trust, being honest with them and being open-minded and being just genuine, your approach is everything. And I think you can establish that connection and really get to understand that child, to know how to advocate for them and what truly is in their best interest. And let them know that you care, and then let them know that they should be able to trust people and not be distrusting and so guarded with everything in their life.
Really earning the trust, right? Not feeling entitled to it. Jared, I'm going to hand it to you, but then Roger, something you had mentioned that I really wanted to also talk about was this, you didn't use this exact language, but not working too hard, that really the power and like the role of our volunteers actually is more simple sometimes than we try to make it out to be. But before we get to that, Jared, I think you wanted to say something.
I was going to say, on the staff side of things, I think it's very important to take our interviews very seriously. I think we need to make sure that we are not trying to get the numbers, we need, that we are focusing on quality volunteers. It's tough to say no to somebody because we need volunteers. We need advocates for the children. We need advocates for the families, but we do have to say no sometimes. If a volunteer comes in and they're just gonna advocate for that child and they cannot see past what mom and dad did, then we're gonna have to say no. We need to do our training a little different, if they can't be non-biased, for the parents and meet them where the parents are, then we're gonna have to say no. We have to make sure that our volunteers in training are gonna advocate for the child, but if that parent is working to get that child, then we have to work for everybody. And if the volunteer is not willing to do that, then we're gonna have to make that hard decision and say no.
If the system is broken today, I can tell you that it was non-existent back in the time when I was growing up. It was hugely a mess. And there's, as articulate as we are about what the problems are today, we can't just simply believe that some progress hasn't been made, even to be able to have the discussions today about how it's broken in order to improve it. One of the things that motivated me to be here was to say to, particularly to the volunteers, but obviously to the staff as well, I feel a lot of gratitude to innocent human beings who took time out of their busy schedule to do very little significant things that changed the course of what my life was going to be. If those little things hadn't happened, they stick with me because they were given in a very honest, almost innocent way, and it caused miracles to happen. It caused miracles to happen to me. It isn't about the big things. It's about many times it's about some of very small things. And we can't forget that children who are unseen are like plants in a desert, and a little bit of water, just a little bit of water, can make the difference between prison, suicide, homelessness, all kinds of psychological damage can be fixed by very carefully choosing how we enter the child's life. So I feel gratitude outside of the system, because in my case, the system wasn't at fault. Humanity was at fault. And there was one other part of that I want to say. We direct a lot of our attention toward how we treat our children. And the numbers, as Adam said, haven't changed in decades. 400 to 450,000. The number of people in prison today who have had a foster care experience hasn't changed. 70, 80%, depending on whose data you're looking at.
So societally, we need to see each other differently even before we get to creating a new system. If we can't treat each other as adults, as role models, whether it's in the media, whether it's in our daily lives, differently, the children pick that up. It's part of their socialization process. So we have a burden on ourselves in how we are complicit in creating this system because of the way we live our lives.
Roger, Adam, you and I were talking about the pipeline between foster care and incarceration, and the role compassion plays in that. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people like to think of America as this beacon on the hill, this place of hope, and many immigrants come here, with that story in mind, and many of them, can achieve great things, if politicians don't get in the way, using them as a pawn or something. But when we talk about compassion, in our throwaway society, that 3% who are successful, we hone in on them. Say, look at that guy. When people read my autobiography, Broken Child Mended Man, they say, look at that guy. He pulled himself up by his bootstraps. If he can do it, why can't they do it? And that's not the crux of my story. The crux of my story is I didn't even have any bootstraps. My bootstraps came from my community that didn't give up on me. And that was comprised of foster parents, that was comprised of a coach who encouraged me to go to college, teachers who inspired me to read the right books and write the right stories and hone in on my talents, and gave me the self-esteem that I needed to achieve something in life. And so thanks to them, I was able to break the cycle and be married to my wife for 20 years and be a presence in my 3 children's lives and give them things that I could never even dream of, because the intergenerational trauma stopped with me. I made that decision that they were not going to be abused, they were not going to be neglected. However, none of that would have happened had it not been for my community. So we need to take a look at each child and realize the potential that they have. Living in West Virginia has been an eye-opening experience as a transplant person. Charity brought up a lot of good points. One of the things that strikes me with all of these stories, because to me it was always black and brown kids, and they can't take care of their children, blah blah blah. But West Virginia is 95% white, so recognizing this is happening to white folks for nothing more than just poverty. West Virginia criminalizes poverty, and they take these children out of the homes in droves, more so per capita, not more than Los Angeles, as we were discussing earlier, but more per capita with our small 1.8 million population, and they ship these children out of states. We don't have homes to put them in, so exactly what are they rescuing these poor white children from? I'm not sure that they have the answer, because the data is trash if you go on the website. It just is. It is fabricated. And what worries me about that situation is that it makes our state ripe for human trafficking. It's ripe for losing track of children and not even knowing if we're helping, once we pull them out of the home. And one of the things we're working on in West Virginia CASA is supporting reunification efforts, because studies are showing that one of the worst things you can do is pull a child from a home permanently. Or if you can get them reunified, they at least have a fighting chance later on in life. So we're working on that, and that's something that I would like to see at the national level. But as far as compassion, I know many of us are probably experiencing compassion fatigue, because it's hard work, right? And sometimes you don't feel like you have backup, and that gets exhausting. You burn out, and that's understandable. It happens to social workers, it happens to teachers, so on and so forth, because they see the suffering in their communities, and they see things that just aren't getting done for a variety of reasons. So I want to, based on that compassion part and tying the races together, because, you know, America may be a melting pot, but there's still a lot of back and forth griping between the races that really waste a lot of good, valuable energy and time. All right, so there's a book by Heather McGee. She's one of my heroes. She wrote a book called The Sum of Us, and she talks about swimming pool politics. And back when black people weren't allowed to swim in public pools, and civil rights movement was going on, rather than joining together and everyone having a good time, you know, white politicians would cement over the pools, and there's historical markers throughout the nation where a pool used to be, it's now a parking lot, and that's the reason for it. And so, if black people are allowed to have a good time, then no, we can't have that. No one can have a good time, right? And looking at that, you see the foolishness of it, but that mentality still prevails today in a large way. So you look at a state like West Virginia, 95% white, and I still run into people on my local school board who will talk about crack babies and welfare queens and stuff like that. I'm like, hold on a second. There's like 5 of us here. This is not Shaniqua, you know, on welfare. This is broadly, you know, on meth. And regardless, she needs help, right? She needs help. I don't care about her color. So why are we talking about crack babies when this is, you know, you are denying, you know, you're denying your reality, and you're denying help to them, to the point where we sent back over $1 billion in COVID funds because our senators, Democrat and Republican, both agreed that, you know, people are just going to spend it on drugs. So that's where we're at as a society, and it's not just West Virginia. And you know, I'm probably going to go home and catch flack for this, but the reality is, unless we can get past the color barrier, you know, that is so exhausting. I mean, let's just be honest, it's exhausting. We're all in here, we want the same thing: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and to help children become self-sustaining adults. And in this suffering, we all want the same thing, but I think the compassion starts with recognizing that we can do better.
Thanks, Adam, for that.
9 minutes.
Thank you for my 5-minute, very overt 5-minute warning. Thank you for that. So I think that this idea of compassion fatigue and how it is so many compassionate people aren't able to exhibit the compassion, and you're just making me think that I am at my worst really two times, like at two specific times. One is when I'm hungry and I haven't eaten, and the second is when I'm rushed and I have too much on my plate, right? So like at a very basic level, and then I'm not able to empathize, I'm not able to be compassionate. And so it just made me think about the roles that we're in and how we, as an organization, structure those roles in a way that allows our volunteers to do the simple things, to ensure that youth have normalcy, and they are engaging in activities, to not be so burdened and overwhelmed that they can't connect because they're too busy, like the social workers are too busy to connect, right? But Jerry, you actually mentioned a little earlier about that for CASA, it may mean if we do the right thing or the righter thing, we may lose volunteers. We may not be able to serve as many children possibly. And so before we open up to the audience, I wanted to just kind of, and one of the questions I would have as a follow-up is, and maybe when we hear from y'all, we can talk about some very like specific ways of how do we assess bias when we are working with volunteers, right? What do we need to be including in our trainings that we're not? One of the things that stands out for me is why is it that often our CASAs have expectations of what's in the best interest of children? So for example, you can parent your child and be living out of your car, right? So then why is it that our CASAs expect for our parents to have stable housing to get their child back, right? Like, children don't get removed because of where a parent lives, or they shouldn't. So it's really like turning that upside down and saying, why are our expectations of the parents that we work with not actually like by law what we should be actually requiring parents to do? So you just brought this issue of bias up, and then I wanted to open to the whole group of just small and big tangible things for the next 7 minutes before we open up for Q&A, 6 minutes. What are some ideas that you want to kind of provide to the group?
So on the staff side of that, you really have to look for those biases. That training process, that's still an interview process. And I tell them, when I do the initial interview, I let them know, hey, when we do our training, that's still an interview process. You're interviewing us just like we're interviewing you. If this program is not for you, you let us know. And also, we're gonna let you know if you're not right for us. When we're doing those case studies that National has given us, we also take it a little bit further and ask them those questions, you know, hey, are you gonna be able to find these facts? And when you find them, are you gonna be able to go into those homes, you know, and say, hey, you know, one of the cases, you know, I forget which one it is, maybe the Lavender case, you know, she can't go in the home with her grandma because grandma says that, no, I'm not gonna make mom stay away from here because she's family too. But that's still her family, that's still where she knows, that's still where she needs to go. We should still be pushing back if that's our court case. We still need to be fighting for that kid to go back with their family. There needs to be regulations on that, yeah, but what kind? She's still safe in there if she's with grandma. Maybe she just doesn't leave with mom. There's different safety things they can put in place, but maybe she's still at home with parents. She still can have that safety factor. It shouldn't just be all or nothing. There's nowhere for the kids to go anyway. Like, let's let them be with their families. The volunteers, we also need to make sure that we are meeting those parents where they are. Are we walking through this is the easiest thing you can do. You can get a court order, because we all get those court orders whenever the courts decide to give them to us. Sometimes it's quick, sometimes it takes a little bit. Why are we not finding the parent and say, hey, have you started on these court orders? Because we want to know that. And they say no, we're like, all right, I'm putting that in my court order. You haven't started yet. Why don't we say, hey, this is where you do this at. It says you need therapy services. Oh, they haven't done the recommendation yet? Well, don't you have state insurance? Why don't you go down to the local therapy agency and you can just sign yourself up? Why aren't we going a step further in assisting that family? We don't have to drive them down there, but we can instruct them on what to do. Maybe they came from generational poverty. Maybe they don't know how to do these things. Maybe they don't know how to go to the food bank. Maybe they don't know where the food banks are. If we provide them a list to the food bank, what does that do? Do they know how to call? Like, do they understand? Can we explain it to them? Like, what does that take from us? Like, it takes an extra 5 minutes. Why are we not doing that? Why is that not a standard for us to do those things?
Sherry, I think you have the mic in your hand. So small, big,
This is
tangible
a
things.
sign that I want to talk.
Yes.
Yes.
Universal sign.
No, thank you so much for that. I think that's so important. And when we talk about small, tangible actions, we talk a lot about the system. If you come to my session on mandated reporting, we'll get into the system, organization, and individual level. But on an individual level, we all have an opportunity to really do something. When we talk about the system, yes, it's policies that are in place, laws that are in place that guide and dictate how we show up, but we don't have to show up. The system only works if we walk into these roles every day as individuals and either comply with laws and policies that we do not agree with, or we question them.
Yeah.
We question why they work the way they work. We question that feeling we have inside of our guts when we know it's not right. Or we were talking about some of the trainings we give. I have heard a lot of local directors say yesterday, we're forced to train CASA volunteers this way, but then we have to give the caveat or say, well, we don't do that here. Why are we doing that? Why are we just saying, let's create something that actually works for our communities?
Yeah.
And the sad thing about it is, as individuals who show up, whether you're a volunteer, staff, a board member, anything, when real justice and accountability are on the table, the system's not on trial. The individual is. The individual social worker, the police officer, they're on trial. If you're familiar with Gabriel Fernandez in Los Angeles, that child lost his life because instead of focusing on the 12% of children that are in the system experiencing abuse, we're so focused on the 88% that are there because of poverty, neglect that stems from poverty, that those children fall through the crack. And who was on trial were the social workers.
Yeah.
They lost their jobs.
Yeah. Their jobs.
They were at risk of going to jail.
Yeah.
The system was never on trial. And we benevolently trust this. It's like we have this system that benevolently operates under the guise of protection, and we just follow along. We get hired, or we talk a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion, which basically means we're going to get black and brown and poor people to do this work and check the box and say we did it. And think it's effective, and that's not okay. That's not okay. Question things that are not right. Question things that don't feel good. Question why we show up the way we do, and then don't show up if it's not right. The system only works if we show up.
Woo! Yeah. And can I, well, please applaud before I chime in. And if I could just add one point. Did you all know that most of the children that we work with are not abused and neglected?
Yeah.
Right? We refer in our mission statement, and most of our mission statements will say that we work with children who have experienced abuse and neglect. So per Charity's point, she and I had this conversation because we were developing a mission statement for a new program in Massachusetts, and National CASA insisted that we have certain language in there. Now, unfortunately, we weren't able to completely convince National, but what we did was we said children who have either experienced abuse or neglect or are at risk for abuse or neglect. Because at the very least, we wanted to acknowledge that the reality is that many children we work with are not actually abused and neglected. So I think that those are the types of things that we really need to
And we removed the
push.
language completely from Los Angeles. I told him the first thing you did was ask for permission.
Yeah, well, she has more power than I do.
I know.
So,
And individuals that.
well, that's true.
Yeah,
That's true.
so.
You run the largest CASA program in the country.
A little bit
so.
leverage.
A little bit of leverage, yeah. Before we open a Q&A, anybody just want to throw out another tangible? I think Roger, you mentioned a couple. Adam, you mentioned a couple. So why don't we do this? We're going to stop the panel discussion and make sure we have enough time for Q&A, which means that we really want to make sure that you have questions. Otherwise, we can keep talking. But how many of you would like to chime in and maybe ask a question? At least a few of you? Okay, good. All right, I just want to make sure we have at least a handful, and maybe we'll build off of each other. What'd you say?
I was saying some hands back there too.
All right, we have.
Hello. Do you need me?
Do you want to be like the Oprah or Phil Donahue of the group?